All right, we've got a job here because we couldn't have the class last week. And even though I wrote a newsletter on the Torah portion, Naso, we didn't get to do it in class. So I picked up a few different things out of Naso that I think relate not just to this week's Torah portion, which is Beha Alocha, but also ties us back to Leviticus, to the Torah portions Tazria and Metzorah, which give us very detailed instructions about the leper. And if you had a chance to pull up last night's class, we went over just a very general description of those 4 colors of leprosy. And if you want to go back and study it in detail, you can go back to Workbook 5, Volume 3, to Vayikra. And it's toward the end of Tazria and in Metzorah. It's in both of those Torah portions. And that's what we realize as we're reading the book of Revelation, is that the entire book is based in the Torah itself. It's grown out of understanding that not just Yeshua, who's transmitting the message, and the angels who are transmitting the message to John, even John has an understanding that the people he's writing to are going to have ears to hear. They'll understand that catchphrase, and it'll drive them back to the Torah, especially the Song of Moses. And from there, they would grow their understanding of the things that John was describing. And one of those things that we would understand is the colors of the horses and how they relate to the 4 colors of leprosy, or even the colors of health, recovering from leprosy. And last night we talked about the difference between gold and goldish. Sometimes it's translated a pale horse, but the color in Greek is chloros, which is a yellowish green. It's that same yellowish green, the tzahov, that we see as a color of leprosy. And so that color is not gold, it's gold-ish. Just like corrupted gold turns green. It shows you that the gold is impure. So in Revelation, as these horses ride out and they begin executing those judgments in conjunction with the seals, it pushes us back to the Torah. And it takes a long time, I believe, to learn the instructions dealing with leprosy. Because most of us, I don't think probably any of us, have ever seen a biblical leprosy. It was considered a supernatural judgment. I know there's people who are called lepers today, and it has very leper-like symptoms in terms of eating away the flesh. But in the camp of Israel, it was considered absolutely a supernatural judgment that would require you to pull the priest in for an examination according to the standard of judgment, which is the Torah itself. And if he helped you, if he guided you back to the Torah, he could diagnose your symptoms. He could look at maybe the swelling and say, there's an issue with pride in your life. Let's sort through your life and see, where is this pride? He could look at the burn and he could say, okay, where have you been burned in a relationship? What is this resentment that you're holding inside? Because it's eating up your soul. And your skin is trying to tell you that your soul is messed up in this area. Let's work through this problem. Issues of uncleanness. All right. Are you not managing your states of tameh properly? That could break out on you eventually if you continue in the sin. And the example I gave last night is, if you think of an old Thomas Edison light bulb, it's clear. And inside you can see the light, the little filament thing or whatever it's called. You turn the light on and you don't really see the glass. You see the light shining through the glass. But if we consider the colors of leprosy like paint, if we take a little paintbrush and we dip it in the paint, let's say that our leprosy is the chai leprosy, which means life, but it's a contronym because obviously there's something else going on because it means raw flesh. It's a type of leprosy where raw flesh is exposed and the color is red. So let's take a little bit of red paint and just splash it on that light bulb. But you can still see the light. You haven't obscured the entire light, but you've created spots that obscure some of the light. And if we don't deal with those paint splatters, if we don't deal with this outbreak of chai in the skin, then it will grow, it will spread. And before you know it, it covers up the whole light bulb. And then it's really hard to see any light coming out of it all. It's very dim. And that really fits with the explanation of Israel in the days of the high priest Eli, where it says the lamp of God had not yet gone out, but it was certainly burning down because the sin of his sons it wasn't just flicking paint on the light bulb, it was building up and spreading to the point where it says there was no prophecy, there was no vision because the light of the Torah was obstructed. And where there is no Torah, there is no light, there is no vision, and there is no prophecy. So there's an interesting account in 2 Kings chapter 7, 1 through 2. And it's written during the time of the prophet Elisha. It's a judgment that's about to come on the king. And it says, then Elisha said, listen to the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow at about this time, a measure of fine flour will be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria, which Samaria is in Israel. The royal officer, as opposed to Judah, I'll clarify that. The royal officer on whose hand the king was leaning answered the man of God and said, behold, if the Lord should make windows in heaven, could this thing be? Okay, that's a pretty profound statement of disbelief. Then he said, Elisha said, behold, you will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat of it. So Elisha is trying to bring the king of Israel good news, that the siege is about to be broken, that the army that is besieging them, something incredible, miraculous is about to happen, and that siege will be lifted, and they will once again be able to buy food. But they've been under siege for such a long time, they're saying, basically, even if the army did go away, how would we have the food to buy? Because we haven't been able to go out and work the fields. The fields are barren. They've already eaten up everything that we had out in the field. If you've ever driven through Israel, you know how the cities are. Everybody lives in a little town or a city, and the fields surround. So once an army surrounds you, they have full control of your field and your food supplies. And all you have left is anything you have stored in the city itself. So it's not like you will open the gates, even if miraculously this army disappeared, run out the gates and start harvesting wheat and barley. So in a natural realm, you can see why there was such skepticism. You know, it says, even if the Lord should make windows in heaven, could this thing be? Well, if the Lord makes windows in heaven, a blessing pours out. And sometimes he does it in unexpected ways. And in this particular case, as we keep reading, we read the story of 4 lepers. And we have 4 horses in Revelation bearing the 4 colors of leprosy. So these lepers are all the way, their place in the wilderness was all the way outside of the boundary of where the 12 camps were encamped. And that's why I wanted you to have a piece of paper so you could make your own little drawing of who was allowed in which space. Now there's fully, if you examine the minutia, there are 10 holy spaces in Israel. There are 10 levels of holiness in Israel. We're not going to deal with those. We're only going to deal with 3 of them. We're going to simplify today. But the leper did not even have a place in the outer camp. He had to go beyond the camp of the Israelites. So these lepers are in that condition. They're outside of the city walls because they can't come in. And it says when these lepers, and there was a supernatural judgment, and the army runs away that's besieging the city. And so here are these lepers, they walk into the camp, and the camp is empty. An entire army has run away. They've left their tents, they've left their supplies, they've left their equipment, they've left everything sitting right where it was. So everything that an entire army would travel with, including all their food, is right there for the taking. So you've got these 4 lepers. It says they came to the outskirts of the camp. They entered one tent and ate and drank and carried from there silver and gold and clothes and went and hid them. And they returned and entered another tent and carried from there also and went and hid them. Then they said to one another, "We're not doing right." What were they not doing right? I mean, let's just take this simple statement within the text. They took silver and gold and clothes and hid them. Now, in a natural realm, we get exactly what they're doing. They don't have any source of sustenance unless they have relatives who are bringing them food and clothing. If they run out of relatives, or, if you've ever been around a prison, what you realize is a lot of times when people get locked up, within a few years, their family forgets about them. They might get visits at the beginning, and those visits get farther and farther and farther in between because life goes on the outside. So these lepers are looking at all the loot and saying, "Hey, let's get all this silver and gold and these clothes and let's hide it." And that way, when we need food or when we need clothes, we've got the means to acquire it without depending upon a beneficent family member to remember us. And then they said to one another, "We're not doing right." They recognize, because they're just scampering from tent to tent. I would probably do the same thing. They said, "This is a day of good news, but we are keeping silent." So if we have the good news and we are silent, then we're not doing right. We're hiding the treasures of silver and gold in the Word. Yeshua gave us the silver and the gold of the Word, and he wants us to spread the good news. He doesn't want us to huddle up with our Torah commentaries and never share the things that we learn. He wants us to enjoy those things because he's provided the empty tent. He gave us the silver and gold. He gave us the garments of righteousness of his word to put on, the garments of Yeshua. But if we keep it to ourselves, if we keep silent, we're not doing right, because there's people still stuck in the city that think even if the windows of heaven opened, they wouldn't want to put on a commandment. They say if we wait until morning light, punishment will overtake us. Now, this is interesting because I'm thinking, for a leper, what more are you going to do to him? All he's got left to do is die. Was it Moses or Aaron who was interceding for Miriam and said, "Please don't let her be like one that's stillborn, like one born dead." And so a leper was viewed as one dead, a dead person walking. But even these lepers recognize that if we wait till the morning light, we're going to be punished. Now, I'm not sure what they thought would happen, but they recognized and repented. We can see a step of repentance right there. And if we're thinking, okay, if the world is being judged by its leprosy, in the book of Revelation, what do they have to do to make it right? They have to wake up and say, what we're doing is not right. This is a day of good news, and I'm so tired of people of faith and people who are learning the commandments doing nothing but spreading bad news. They're just obsessed with conspiracies and my goodness, if you've got the good news, but you're elevating the bad news so people understand that the victory's already won, that the commandments are there for the taking. Because the mitzvot, the righteousness of Yeshua, are the garments that we put on. Notice that juxtaposition there. It says silver and gold and clothes. Right? So it's drawing an association for you there. The wisdom of the Torah is called more precious than gold. Right? Putting on robes of righteousness. The commandments are righteousness for you, because this is the word of Yeshua for you. And you put on his clothes and it becomes good news. And so they said, therefore come, let us go and tell the king's household. All right. So as you look there at the context there in 2 Kings, if you want to read the whole story, the 4 lepers were at the gate of the city when they made up their minds to do something. Because remember, the enemy is camped right there at the gates of the city. That's where they would attack. And so the lepers they came first to the outskirts of the camp and they said, hey, where's everybody? And they realized, oh my goodness, everything we could ever imagine is right here. The treasures of the Torah are everything we could imagine, but they were never intended to be hoarded. They were intended to be shared so that people who were under siege, who were shut up in the city and starving because there's a famine of the word of God inside, we can share that good news. And if they choose, and we got a guy here, he's not going to eat of this. Because that's what Elisha says, behold, you will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat of it. That kind of disbelief, the ironic thing is you get exactly what you want. Now, had he said, that sounds like a great prophecy, Elisha, I want to believe you, I'm struggling to believe you, but forgive my unbelief. Isn't that what somebody said? Just forgive thou my unbelief. Because I want to. I know I should. It's just that my soul is interfering. This leprosy in me, this sickness of my soul is interfering with my spirit, really drinking in what you're saying. And so rather than just be patient and at least keep his mouth shut and see if the prophet's word would come true, he's got to be a little smarty pants. It's better to keep your mouth shut than be a smarty pants, because smarty pants did not eat of it. He got judged. And that's why, sometimes it says, don't cast your pearls before swine. If you already know somebody is going to give you a really tacky response to a word of good news, if you're sharing with them the joy in the commandment, the light in the commandment, the healing in the commandment, the Holy Spirit in the commandment, and that person is going to come back at you with some disbelieving, sarcastic response, for their good, sometimes it's better to withhold. And that way they're not adding sin to sin. Just stop it right there. And in this case, though, it was divinely appointed, because this was an aid to the king. But you can see his pride. This is the royal officer on whose hand the king was leaning. It was not that man's place to answer for the king. There's a lot of people who believe they're answering for the king right now, and they're not. They're speaking out when the king should be taking the leadership. in terms of answering to the prophecy. And so it's a usurpation of authority. And when we decide to usurp authority, that is derived from pride, a proud look. Basically, he's saying, I know more than you, Elisha, the man who apprenticed with Eliyahu, the man who's doing twice the miracles of Eliyahu. You realize Elisha doubled the miracles? And so this royal officer believes he's somebody when he's nobody. And he believes he's qualified to speak up and to comment on the prophecy. He's not qualified at all. So we do want to be careful where we drop those little jewels. But they're being tested, I believe, and it helps us decode Revelation because of the judgments that are being turned loose in Revelation. And there are people in captivity. I believe there's people whose captivity is being turned. I believe we're part of those people. Our captivity is being turned. What does it say? Like the springs in the Negev. Those who go forth weeping, bearing a bag of seed, they will return in joy, carrying the sheaves with them. And those sheaves, the wheat, is the wheat of the Torah. It's the fine wheat of Shavuot that commemorates the giving of the Torah. So when you come bearing your sheaves with you, you are bearing the richness of the Torah itself as the testimony, as the evidence of your turning and of your patience. That you sowed what seed you had. You know, don't be upset that, I wish I had known all these things 20 years ago. I wish I'd grown up knowing these. Don't worry about that. The principle of the seed is in effect. Whatever little bit of seed you knew that you sowed, look at the harvest that's going to come back with you. You're going to come back full, as much as you can carry. So how much more could you carry than what you could carry? Right? Remember, we have everything. We have enough. So they're being tested to see if their captivity could be turned. Now, the text doesn't tell us if they were healed. It doesn't seem to think that's relevant. But in a spiritual sense, we see their healing. Because they turned and said, this is not right. We should be sharing the good news. We have been saved. You know, we were about to starve too. We have been saved, and we must share that salvation with others. And we can see that they're exercising gratefulness. You're saying we can't be given this great gift and not be grateful and share it. So what could have contributed if we look at these lepers? They went from lepers to basically good gold with good news. If it takes us back to the rivers of Eden, because they chose some different things. They chose gratitude. They chose forgiveness. Can you imagine how resentful you would be outside the city gates, especially when you felt like people weren't remembering you? And people just don't. When you're out of sight, you're out of mind. And you're uncomfortable to look at. And you're contagious. All right? And instead of holding that grudge, which is one of the things that can cause an outbreak of leprosy, instead of being greedy, which can cause an outbreak of leprosy, instead of being proud, which can cause an outbreak of leprosy, instead of gossiping about the people in the city, which can cause an outbreak of leprosy, they repented of their covetousness and they moved on. So in a spiritual sense, I think we can look at these four lepers and see that gratitude really unlocked for them what was causing the outbreak of leprosy. And remember that it's getting burned a lot of times that'll cause that outbreak. That was one of the the examinations is, did it break out of a burn? Did it break out of a swelling, which means a high place, a place of pride? Remember those high places we talked about where we know we just don't let people touch us right there? Well, you can guard that high place all you want, but you can't guard it from the Holy Spirit, because the Father loves us enough to send a horse up in that high tower and to say, hey, you've got your own little Babel tower up here, and we're going to tear it down. Because remember the white, the Levan versus the Levanah, the white versus the white-ish. The bricks of Babylon were made of white bricks. So it's a contronym. Just like we say gold, gold-ish. Gold, good. Gold-ish, leprosy. Okay, there's white, there's a purity of white, there's a transparency of light with white, but there's also white-ish, which can be a sign of leprosy. It was the color of the bricks of Babylon. And so that's why in Revelation 18, 1 through 10, it says, after these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Now, in this section of Torah portions, and I tried to tie together some of them for you today to show you again that context, because we're not that familiar with what we're reading, we tend to compartmentalize and say, okay, today I'm reading about a Nazarite. And today I'm reading about the priesthood and the sacrifices. And today I'm reading about the woman accused. And today I'm reading about what the Levites were supposed to do in the tabernacle. And today I'm learning about the menorah. But you can't do that. You kind of have to do that in the beginning just to get the basic information down. But once you acquire that basic information of what's actually in the Torah portion, and that's why you need to make your own index. Think of each Torah portion as the title on an index card. Go through each Torah portion, take a year cycle, get you a nice big index card, not the little ones. Get you those nice big ones. Right across the top, the name of the Torah portion and the English translation. And then go through there and topically list everything that's in that Torah portion. And you'll look at it sometimes and say, those are some weird topics to put into one spot. But they're not. They're all tied together. And so later when you get to Revelation and you want to know about these 144,000 sealed from the tribes, and you want to find a context for tribes and singing a song and all these other things, you go back through your index card until you find that topic. And you say, oh, I can go to the Torah portion, Matot, and it teaches me about tribes. Thank you. It's like a cheat sheet. But it's important because as you look through those indexes or indices, what you realize is a lot of times this topic's dealt with here and then it's just scattered over here. And then like it's scattered over here. But they're really all tied together. And with this Torah portion, we're also in the neighborhood of Torah portions. It's also going to deal with the Sotah, the woman accused. As we're coming through Bamidbar, it's like that thing is stuck in there. Just like it seems like the Nazarite is stuck in there. Well, what's he doing? Just like we think we're reading Levitical laws and all of a sudden we're talking about a woman accused. But the woman accused is described in Revelation. All right, and John's even picturing it for us when he eats the scroll and it tastes like honey in his mouth. Well, we know the Torah, it's sweeter than honey in the honeycomb. And it says it's more to be desired than gold, even much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. So he eats the scroll, and then it gets down into his stomach. It's like it's bitter. Oh, this is horrible. What's going on? He's picturing for us the judgment on the adulterous woman, the woman who's played the harlot. And part of the ceremony, the priest is going to say the curses twice, and she's going to say Amen, Amen. And then her belly and her thigh will fall. So they will fall. So you take that, if you have that on your index card, now you have a context for somebody putting words of Torah on a scroll or on a parchment. And in her case, she's drinking it. And it says in Revelation, she's being made to drink it. Why? Because it's a cup full of abominations. When you violate the Torah, it's an abomination to you. And you become an abomination to him. But when you keep the Torah, it's sweeter than honey and honeycomb, and you will bear fruit. You will have children as a testimony to your faithfulness. So Babylon, we can associate with the harlot and the guilty woman accused. Now, there's also a virtuous woman in Revelation. There's going to be two kinds of women. And the spirit of judgment is going through to determine which one of those women you are. So it says in Revelation 18:1, I think, after these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory. And he cried with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, and she has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. Okay, right there you have equivalence of expression. Remember equivalent expressions. They're not identical, but they're equivalent in terms of metaphor and teaching you the relationship. Babylon is a dwelling place. Now, a human being can be a dwelling place. And it's a dwelling place for demons. It's a dwelling place of every unclean spirit. And would you say that those are equivalent expressions? Sure. Now, there are different classes of demons, just like there's different classes of angels. But in general, we can say that a demon is an unclean spirit, which is why you manage your states of tameh, or ritual uncleanness. Why? Because eventually it will get you put outside of the camp. Because the origin of Babylon is pride. Remember the king of Babylon that we keep going back to in Isaiah? He said in his heart, I will lift my throne above the throne of God. I will sit on the mount of the Moed. That is the great sin of leprosy. And a lot of the other things that can happen grow out of pride. For instance, let's say you get burned in a relationship and you're susceptible to the chai affliction, which is the raw flesh, or the burn. And somebody really burned you. I mean, you were legitimately burned. You have to deal with that. And it hurts. Betrayal hurts. And you have to work through those things. It's part of every single person's experience. But along the path of grieving that relationship, if it cannot be mended, and even if it can be, along that path, you're going to make a series of choices. And sometimes it hurts so much, you make wrong choices. You start doing the exact opposite of what you would need to do to become healthy, spiritually healthy again. What might rest in there is not just a suspicion of that person. You might also include everybody else within a category. I can't tell you how many times in 1 week I have heard Hebrew roots people calling people Pharisees. And see, we got used to doing that in church. We just thought it stood for religious hypocrisy, and it does. That's one meaning of a Pharisee, a religious hypocrite. But historically and biblically, we can't make that statement anymore because we know better. We know some things about the Pharisee. They hated their own hypocrites and wrote bad things about them. They hated them just as much as we do. But to simply label anybody that's hyper-religious or self-righteous as a Pharisee is inappropriate for a Hebrew roots person. Because if you're going to do that, then let's rip out the book of Acts. Let's rip out every letter that Paul wrote. Because Paul said, I am a Pharisee and the son of a Pharisee, and it's because of the resurrection of the dead that I'm being accused. See, that's what Paul identified with being a Pharisee. He wasn't being disingenuous. He was stating very clearly what he thought a Pharisee was. See, but we were conditioned in reading the Gospels without the history of the Pharisees. It looks like all the Pharisees are doing all the wrong stuff. And a lot of times we're mistaking what the Sadducees were doing with the Pharisees because we don't know what they believed. And so we just assume that anybody that was religious that Yeshua didn't like was a Pharisee. This is not accurate. So we have to straighten up things like this. We have to be careful what comes out of our mouth, because what comes out of my mouth is a grudge that's in my heart. See, if I have been conditioned not just to hate religious hypocrites or just to hate a self-righteous person who may have burned me, who may have kicked me out of church, or who made my church life miserable, I can't carry that over to my present reality because I'm bringing bad news into good. And I have to share the good news, not the bad news. And so the lepers, they could have gone into the city and said, you didn't treat us right. And now look at all the good stuff we got. And you're not going to heaven. That's not what they did. They were grateful for a second chance. And when Yeshua gives us the Torah, we have to be grateful for a second chance. And we can't hold that grudge in our hearts against the church. Or if we're unhappy because Jews haven't welcomed us with open arms, or a Jewish person smarted off to us or cut in front of us in the line, at the departure gate, you can't carry that grudge with you. You just can't. You cannot deal with holy things carrying that grudge, because eventually it'll show up in your skin. It'll show up in your outward appearance. It'll work its way out into the visible part of you. It'll work its way out of your mouth. And sometimes we just don't know that grudge is there. That's why it takes the Holy Spirit, and we have to be able to listen to even know when someone might be used of the Holy Spirit to address that old hurt, and you finally come to a realization, like these lepers. I mean, they're just busy looting the camp. And they listen to the Spirit, because the Spirit says, be grateful. You have much. You have everything right now except your health, apparently. So if you have food to eat and clothes on your back, new clothes on your back, and you have silver and gold, then you have enough, and you need to share it with people who have, at this point, ready to eat their own children. It needs to be shared. So how do you not end up in Babylon? You get out of your tower. You get out of being your own boss. That's one thing we can say about Hebrew roots people. They really do not like authority at all. Because again, that grudge, they feel like authority betrayed me. The authority of the rabbis betrayed me. The authority of the church betrayed me. My local pastor betrayed me. He didn't tell me the whole truth. You have to let it go. Just like the lepers, let it go. Because the story really is about the lepers. They were the hinge. It wouldn't have been that great of a story if the lepers hadn't stumbled into the camp and realized the army's gone. And they left all the loot. It's about a change in their hearts. It's about a second chance. But Babylon the Great, this source of pride, what happens if the reason he'll afflict us with a skin affliction on the outside is so we'll know that something's wrong on the inside. So that we'll say, hey, where's my pride problem? Where's my blind spot in this? Where am I too proud? Am I too proud to mend this relationship? Or am I too proud to give it up? Maybe somebody told you years ago, that is an unwise association and it will lead you to destruction. And out of pride, you refuse the wise counsel and you're still friends with somebody you have no business walking with. Because can two walk together unless they be agreed? So if you're walking, you're agreeing with the way that they're walking. We're talking about an acquaintance. You have to be pleasant to everybody. But I'm talking about forming these deep friendships because eventually what happens, remember the leprosy spreads. You might think you can influence them for good, but if they haven't changed after 10 years, maybe they're not going to. Maybe you should be taking the good news to people who are starving, not to somebody who doesn't even know he's hungry. So pride can go either way. Let's see. We really need to move on to the camp. Last night we talked about the lashon, the tongue, which is actually the balancing bar at the top of the scale. And if we look at this example here of Elisha's prophecy and the 4 lepers, then it even gives us kind of a visual of the black horse and the rider who's holding the scales. And at the top of the scale is a tongue. 4 of the 7 abominations are caused by a tongue. Last night we read how it talks about the hands of the tongue, which is pretty amazing. And so he's holding the scale, he's holding the balance there of judgment, and he starts giving you the price of the barley and the wheat, which is significant because it was the same with Elisha. He's giving the king the price of the barley and the wheat. And in terms of sharing the message, it took 4 lepers repenting to be able to spread that there's good news in the midst of the judgment. The siege can be broken if you repent. Okay, now I wanted you to make your little diagram. And instead of doing the circle one this time, just do use, think of it in terms of squares, like Hollywood squares. Except you're going to have a center, because I want to look at the 3 levels of holiness. It's important to understand the structure of the camp because Moses had to assemble it just the way he saw the pattern in heaven. And if we are wanting to be part of the resurrection, then we have to understand the arrangement. We have to understand the services. We have to understand the articles. We have to understand the work that actually goes on in this place because it's all giving us pictures. It just seems so remote because when we get into animal sacrifices, everybody kind of glazes over. but we can learn from them symbolically, especially as it concerns what happens to us after we die or at the resurrection. There's an interesting term phrase because when we looked at the 144,000, it talked about they were taught a song. All right, and I did address that in the newsletter, how you can take all those things and put them together. But in chapter 4, verse 47, and we're going to go back to Naso. Chapter 4, verse 47, it's talking about the service of the Levites. And it says, from 30 years of age and up until 50 years of age, everyone who comes to perform, and it says there, it's actually a triple word. When you see a double word, you pay attention, but when you see a triple word, you really pay attention. It says, la'avod, avodat, avodah. La'avod, avodat, avodah. And they have translated this into English as everyone who comes to perform service of a service and the work of carrying in the tent of meeting. And where it says service of a service, or the work of a service, the rabbis understand that this is a song, that the Levites learn a song. That particular phrase right there, la'avod, avodat, avodah, we know it as work or service, but the rabbis are saying this is a Levitical service of song. And we don't really hear much about it in the Torah, just like a lot of things. You don't hear much about it in the Torah, but then we get over here in the prophets, and the prophets are acting like we already know things. Or say, well, where did they get that? Well, there is an oral tradition that's passed down that really isn't recorded in the Torah except in kind of seed hints. And this is a seed. It's considered a seed concerning the Levites, that the Levites will sing. And that song service, it's performed, it says, with cymbals and with harps. Cymbals and harps. So the la'avod, avodat, avodah. Later, when we get into the prophets and the writings, and it describes the Levites using harps and cymbals and so forth, that's the seed of it right there. If you ever wondered where that is, sometimes it's just nice to know where stuff was in terms of the seed. And it says, starting with chapter 5, verse 1, Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, command the children of Israel that they shall send away from the camp everyone with tzarat, everyone who has had a zav emission, and everyone impure by a corpse. Male and female alike shall you send away to the outside of the camp, shall you send them, so that they should not make their camps impure within which I dwell. All right, as we read that in English, it's pretty vague, to be quite honest. If we're trying to understand, well, where do people go if they have leprosy? What if they simply have an omission, like a night omission? What if they've touched a corpse? Where exactly is it okay to be within the camp? Especially if we're looking at the way the camp is set up as a prophecy of the world to come. Dwelling in the divine present. So at this point, we're transferring and looking at the tabernacle itself and its boundaries. Okay, and then there was a doorway to the tent of meeting, and a lot of things transacted there at the doorway. Why? Because a doorway represents authority. and passing in and out. So on your paper, just draw you a little rectangular tabernacle, and understand that even within that tabernacle, basically a curtain fence, if we want to call it that, even within the curtain fence, there's going to be open areas, like where the brazen altar would be, where the wash basin would be. So we're not talking about just the covered part of the tabernacle. We're talking about the tabernacle precinct. That's going to be at the heart of the camp. I want you to also think of it as the hottest place in the camp. Why? Because now the divine presence has moved in. So that's going to be one level of holiness. There's actually within that one level, there's more levels, but we're not going to do the 10. We're just going to do 3. So within your tabernacle precinct, I want you to write divine presence, or the Shekhinah, and then 2 notes or 2 bullets if you prefer bullets. Number 1, no corpses. And number 2, the word is zav in Hebrew, but it means emissions. So no emissions. You can't go in to present. You could get up to the door in some cases. And from there, somebody could take it and take it inside, but you could not pass through the doorway. If you had been in contact with a corpse and you had not immersed yourself on the 3rd and the 7th days first, and you get into this when you get into the Nazarite. See, where all this stuff's in the neighborhood. The very specific instructions to the Nazarite, like if he gets unclean by a corpse accidentally, he has to immerse on the 3rd day and the 7th day, and then he has to shave his head, and then bring in a bird offering on the 8th day. And we see in each of the instructions about the Nazarite, it's very close to the priests and the Levites who work within the Shekhinah, the presence of the Shekhinah within this holiest precinct of Israel. So there's 2 things that would keep you out of getting that close. No corpses and no emissions. Now, there's going to be a box around that which would represent the camps of the Levites. And they camped, and in fact, if you go back and you look at the first lesson, Bamidbar, I think, it gives you the arrangements of the camps, and it's not meant to be like wonderfully correct. It's just to give you an idea of placement. But those Levites had assigned places around that Shekhinah and the altars, and they guarded, and this is why Pinchas was perfectly within his authority to pick up a spear and to spear Zimri and Cosby when they were committing fornication at the gateway of the tabernacle, because they're now in his territory. You're not going to bring that idolatry and that adultery up into the camp of the Levites. He's not going to, that's his job, to guard that. You notice he didn't go out into the camps of Israel and do it. A lot of times the judgment that's happening with the camps of Israel is supernatural. If you notice, like with the snakes and so forth, the plague, it'll start hitting on the outskirts of the camp, which is a message. And that's why Aaron had to run and stand between the people and the plague. When you think of the vast territory that camp took up and how far Aaron would have to run, because he would have to go from basically where the divine presence is, run out of the camp of the Levites, and then run into the tribal territory. That's pretty good running for an old man. Right? But that was his heart. He wanted to stand between the people and the plague. Now, this might surprise you, but for your bullet points, like who can go in the camp of the Levites? Surprisingly, if you are unclean because of a corpse, you can be in there. Now, with corpse, I want you to put an equivalent. I don't know if you know how to write the equivalent expression sign, but it's like an equal sign with a little squiggly thing through it. In rabbinic mindset, corpse equals bones. And I talked to Dr. Taylor, I think the week before last, because I couldn't talk, but I could study. And I was trying to figure out, why are they equating bones, like touching bones is touching the soul, because we talked about the soul. And apparently there's a pretty good blood supply in the bone to the bone marrow. And so if the blood's gonna stick anywhere on your body, once you're dead, it's gonna be stuck in the bones. There's gonna be some residue in there long after your flesh disintegrates and goes back to the earth. That bone tends to still be there, and you're still gonna have some of that tissue stuck down in the bone marrow. So the bones are an equivalent expression to a corpse, which is an equivalent expression to nephesh, soul. So there is some little residue within the bones of a soul. You say, that's impossible. Do you remember the bones, the dry bones? Do you remember people getting thrown into a grave and then resurrecting because they touched some, was it Elijah's bones? There is a residue of the nephesh within the bones, especially apparently of a righteous person. The reason we know it's okay for the corpse to be in the camp of the Levites is because of Exodus 13:9. Because remember, it was Moses who brought the bones of Joseph. And Moses lived in the camp of the Levites. Moses was a Levite. So you could go right up to the doorway of the Tabernacle Precinct. You just could not go in if you had touched a corpse. But could a corpse be in the camp of the Levites? It could, because those bones of Joseph were in there, which is interesting because Joseph doesn't live in the camp of the Levites. But in that strange instance, his bones dwelled with the Levites. And no emissions, no zav, Z-A-V. No zav in the camp of the Levites. Now, I'm not sure what the Levites would actually do if they did have a seminal emission in the night. It doesn't tell us specifically how that was handled. Was there like an outer perimeter that would be adjacent to the 12 tribes where they would just kind of move out until, because they had to immerse, and then they would be unclean until evening, and then they could come back in. I don't know how that was handled, but this is just breaking down this passage from a rabbinic understanding of the Hebrew text. Okay. Now you've got your outer Hollywood squares. And these are going to be the encampments of the 12 tribes, and they also have their assigned position. And isn't it interesting that everything in this perimeter has its place? Nobody had to wonder where they were supposed to be or not be. They knew exactly what their assigned place was. And you realize that just gets rid of so many arguments. And when we see the rebellion of Korach, we can see what would have been a problem. It's wanting to move beyond your assigned place. If scripture assigns you a place, then it's just like the royal officer answering for the king and saying something stupid. When you try to answer for people and that's not your place, not your assigned place, it's not within your authority, then you're going to do or say something pretty stupid a lot of times. And it might be right on, it might be very wise. It's just out of place. You can do the right thing in the wrong place. So we've got the camps here of the 12 tribes. It's okay if you have a corpse. It's okay if you have a Zav emission. Your only bullet point there really is going to be Sarat. I'll type it for you. It doesn't like that word, but we're going to type it anyway. There we go. Sarat. And the leper is a form of that. The leper is called a metzorah. So you have the affliction of tzarat, but the person who has the affliction of leprosy is metzorah. Oh, that's because I sent it to Jennifer. I don't know why I did that. Copy. Paste. Everyone. It's good news. Well, I guess not. Leprosy is not really good news, but there is good news in it because it's telling us how to deal with it. So we're not put out with Babylon the Great, which is going to be the habitation, and that's the area we're looking at now. As we move beyond the 12 tribes, we're in the location, which is outside the boundaries, but adjacent. So the leper is with the camp, but he's not with the camp. The metzorah. And so all around here, you can have a leper. You can have a metzorah. And so you can see as you move into the heart of the camp, the holiness requirements become greater, or the management requirements become greater, because at some time everybody's going to have an emission. You just have to know where you can go and where you can't go, and the procedure for managing that emission. Wow, we didn't get very far at all. At any rate, if I've got more voice next week, we'll finish this. We'll pull together Naso and Beha Alocha, along with the Metzorah from Leviticus, and pull all that into Revelation. But for now, I guess we'll just stop with diagramming the camp and understanding that out here represents every unclean thing. Right? And that's what it said. Every demon. What are you susceptible to when you're outside the camp? Demonic activity. Why? Because you have not managed your states of tameh, or ritual uncleanness. It's only those who manage those things who can remain within the camp, or even cross into that divine presence, if that makes sense. So if you're offering your offering, you can go right there to the doorway and slaughter your offering right there at the doorway. And there's even some symbolism. Remember, the tribe of Levi, it means attachment. Remember, Leah said, now my husband will be attached to me. So what is the job of a Levite? It's to help attach the tribes to the divine presence. They're the intermediary. If you look at your box, it's the Levite that is camped between the divine presence and the tribes, helping them to learn and to manage so that they can move inward and get closer and closer and closer to the divine presence with that proper management of being human, a fallen human being. If you don't manage being a fallen human being, then you end up outside the camp, fallen. You're susceptible to demons, unclean spirits, and it says every unclean bird. What does an unclean bird do? Typically, it will eat flesh. It will eat carcasses of unclean things, right? And we are not creatures that were made to eat carcasses. We don't eat corpses. We handle our dead very differently than unclean birds. We had a dead raccoon out here last week, and it was fresh when I went to town, and by the time I got back, there was nothing but bones. That's how fast those turkey vultures will devour a carcass. So they feed on raw flesh. And that's nothing that you can bring into the divine presence. And so that area out there is for Babylon. It's for people who have not managed states of pride, which leads to hypocrisy, which leads to unforgiveness, which leads to ungratefulness. See, every unclean thing starts popping up, which helps us understand why Yeshua said it's not the things that go into a person, it's the thing that's coming out of them. You know, it's a sign of the heart that divine presence is not dwelling within the heart. And that heart really is not attached. It doesn't have a Levitical attachment to the Holy One. And if you're not attached to the divine presence, then you have no reason to manage your uncleanness, if that makes sense. If I never intended to go in to the divine presence in this camp, I can live any way I want to. And that's basically what Revelation says, outside. That's where all these things are, because they're living any way they want to. They are not living and managing their lives as though they want to move in. And remember, the Levites were taken in place of the firstborn of Israel. So they're representative of all Israel coming into those holier places and doing the service of the service of the service. And that takes us back to Revelation, like they're going to be taught a song. So even the tribes, just like the Levites are pictured in the Torah portion Naso, learning the song of service, and Revelation, it is extended out. Why? Because the holiness has gone out into the camp. He told us at the beginning, I want to dwell among you. I mean, you're not going to build a tent for me. Get real. But I want you to learn how to walk in holiness. And when you learn to manage these things in your life and to walk in holiness, then my presence can go out. And it can infuse every corner of the camp, because all the unclean things are going to be outside the camp. People who are willing to manage pride, gossip, and all these things. These are the people who can walk in holiness and not be killed. See, that presence would kill us if there weren't a process of purification. And I think that's what we see post-mortem. As we're learning in the lower garden, what is he teaching us? And that's something I do want to follow up on next week, is to look at the rivers of Eden as boundaries of these camps, to show what it takes to move from here to here, and then from here to here. And then why the Cushite would be in that inner part, because she's black. And Song of Songs tells us she's black because she's been working. She's been doing the service of the service of the service. She says, don't hate me because I'm black. There's a reason. I've been serving. So there you get that contronym of the Shoham stone, the Onyx stone. It's a black stone, but it means to turn white. So is the beloved, is she black or is she white? Yes, she is. She's white with purity and she's black with service. Right? She's in the hot part of the camp. She's where the altars are. Where the fire's going. She's where the coals are. She's right up there. And so we'll follow up with that next week. But there's beauty here in saying, hey, I don't want to end up out there in Babylon, fallen, adulterous, unholy, defiled, producing deathly fruit. I want to come into the camp and I want to learn whatever it is I have to learn. You know, even if I start out on the farthest boundary of the camp, show me my leprosy. Let your spirit show me my leprosy so I can at least get in there. Because I know you will teach me. That was the job of the Levites and the priests. They were to teach the difference between clean and unclean. Why? Because he didn't want them way out there. He wants them close to the divine presence. And I think that's where our loved ones are right now. They've been assigned homeroom in the lower garden, and they are learning the difference between clean and unclean, so that at the resurrection, that they can get in, like Yeshua said, I haven't yet ascended to the Father, don't touch me. So that we can ascend as we are trained and we learn and we submit and we respect authority and we love one another, that we can ascend to the Father and go into those holier places.